How far would you go to protect a secret that defines who you are? And what would happen if, by hiding it, you were blocking the path to something that could change your life forever? Emily Park ran her fingers across the glass surface of a new display case at the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Arts, inspecting the reflections of light that spread across it. Although it was spotless, she cleaned it once more with a microfiber cloth. There was something calming about the repetitive act of polishing. While the visitors had not yet arrived, silence was his ally, allowing him to concentrate on the smallest details. However, this brief moment of peace was interrupted by a notification on his cell phone. It was a message from Sophia, her best friend. "Do I need to remind you that the show sells out today? Come on, Queen of Secrets." Emily rolled her eyes with a smile. Sophia never missed a chance to tease her, but the message brought a pang of anxiety. For weeks she had been monitoring the release of tickets for singer Ryan Kim, her favorite artist, but avoided buying them. How could something like that be allowed? She was the chief curator of one of New York's biggest museums, a position of respect, not a teenage fan in a concert line. Putting away her cell phone, she took a deep breath and went back to work. His days were filled with meetings with artists and sponsors, planning exhibitions, and managing the team. Focus was an absolute necessity, but his mind kept straying to that welcome email he had received the night before. The message came directly from Ryan Kim. He had been hired as a guest curator for a new contemporary art exhibition at the MMA, and the project was to be overseen by her. Standing in the middle of the central aisle, she felt her stomach drop. Ryan Kim, the singer whose lyrics seemed to describe his own soul, would be working side by side with her. Her admiration for him went far beyond music. She followed interviews, analyses of his compositions, and even the few videos he recorded behind the scenes. However, this fascination was a secret that no one, not even Sophia, fully knew. Before he could sink any further into that thought, Michael Bennett, the museum director, appeared with purposeful steps. His perfectly aligned tie and air of seriousness were a constant reminder of the museum's high expectations. "Emily, I need a full opening schedule report by the end of the day. And regarding the project with Mr. Kim, make sure he receives all the support he needs. This is an important name for us." She nodded, hiding her uneasiness behind her impeccable posture. Ryan wouldn't just be another artist she had to guide. He was a test of his own ability to maintain his composure. As the museum began to fill with its first visitors, Emily retreated to her office. There, in a corner hidden by bookshelves, was a locked drawer. Inside were his little fan treasures, old tickets, a notebook with notes of his songs, and an autographed poster acquired at an anonymous auction years ago. With hesitant fingers, she opened the drawer. The poster was there, folded neatly. Emily ran her fingers over the autograph, feeling the weight of her secret. When Ryan Kim walked through the doors of it would only need to be Chief Curator Emily Park, nothing more. The museum bell echoed. The sound brought her back to reality. On his cell phone screen, a new notification appeared. Ryan Kim had arrived. She closed the drawer in a hurry and stood up. With her heart racing and her professional mask in place, Emily walked toward the beginning of something that would change her life forever. The revolving door of the Metropolitan Modern Arts Museum swung slowly, letting in a breath of fresh air that carried the aroma of coffee and concrete, wet from recent rain. Emily was waiting, standing in the middle of the large entrance hall. The white marble beneath her feet reflected the diffused light coming in from the tall stained glass windows, painting soft patches of blue and gold on the walls. The elegance of the space seemed to pulse around her, but her attention was fixed on the man who crossed the threshold with calm steps. Ryan Kim. He looked exactly like he did in the interviews and in the rare behind-the-scenes images that she studied so much. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves, intentionally tousled. He wore a black leather jacket over a simple white t-shirt, and faded jeans completed his look. It was the kind of combination that looked casual, but exuded an aura of someone who had mastered the art of looking impeccably natural. He carried a small notebook in his right hand, his long, slender fingers clutching the cover as if they were the frame of a delicate painting. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. His heart felt like a rushing drum, beating a rhythm that echoed in his ears. Behind a carefully rehearsed smile, she mustered all the composure her position demanded. "Welcome to Vamamaeng, Mr. Kim," she said, her voice firm but warm. "I'm Emily Park, Chief Curator. It's a pleasure to have you with us." Ryan stopped in front of her and tilted his head slightly, a polite gesture that seemed as genuine as his discreet smile. "The pleasure is mine. I've heard a lot about this museum, and about you," he added, his eyes fixed on hers for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Ryan's eyes had an unexpected depth. They were brown, but carried subtle shades of amber that captured the light around them, as if holding small pieces of sunlight. Emily blinked rapidly, breaking eye contact before he noticed her hesitation. "Let me guide you to the main gallery," she said, gesturing toward the corridor that stretched to the left. He nodded and walked beside her, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. As they walked forward, Emily noticed him looking around with genuine interest. The gallery walls were pure white, contrasting with the dark frames of the artworks. The air was fresh but carried a faint note of paint and polished wood. "Each piece here is carefully selected to tell a story that connects to our central theme," Emily explained, pointing to an abstract painting in shades of red and gold. "Curation is a dance between the artist's intention and the public's interpretation." Ryan stood in front of the painting, his head tilted slightly to the side. "Fascinating. It's like writing music, but with colors and shapes." She felt her heart waver. There was something in his voice, an almost melancholic softness that made it impossible for her to disconnect emotionally. After a few minutes exploring the gallery, they arrived at the meeting room, a more intimate space with large windows that offered a view of the Manhattan skyline. The high ceiling was adorned with modern chandeliers, and the dark wooden table in the center looked inviting and imposing at the same time. Ryan sat at the head, placing his notebook in front of him. Emily slid into a nearby chair, her fingers instinctively touching the edge of the tablet she carried. "So, Mr. Kim, do we start with your vision for the exhibition?" "Please call me Ryan," he said, with a smile that made something inside her melt. "I want this exhibition to show the interaction between music and visual art, how the two influence each other." Emily made a note, but couldn't help but look at his hands as he gestured, passionately explaining his idea. They were the hands of an artist, calloused and precise, each movement seeming to carry meaning. The meeting proceeded smoothly, but Emily was on constant alert. Every word he said, every gesture, seemed like a threat to the control she tried to maintain. She fought the urge to reveal how much she knew about her music, how much her lyrics had been company on lonely nights. When the meeting ended, Ryan stood up and extended his hand to her. It was productive. "I hope we can create something really special together, Emily." She squeezed his hand, the firmness of her touch sending unexpected warmth up his arm. "Of course," she replied, her voice lower than she intended. After he left, the air in the room felt thicker, as if it carried the presence he had left behind. Emily remained there, looking at the empty table, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. She knew she was on dangerous ground. Working with Ryan Kim would be a test not only of her professional skill, but of her ability to hide the side of herself that no one could ever know. The aroma of fresh coffee wafted through the air as Emily walked through the Brooklyn Cafe, where Ryan had invited her for an informal meeting. The place was a mix of dark woods, amber lighting, and wrought iron tables that gave it a cozy, industrial feel. On the walls, abstract paintings shared space with black and white photographs, and the soft sound of a piano in the background seemed to match the environment. Emily felt the slight warmth coming from a fireplace in the opposite corner, contrasting with the cold outside, where snow was beginning to cover the sidewalks. She spotted Ryan at a table in the back. He stood with his back to the entrance, his shoulders relaxed beneath a heavy gray coat. There was an open notebook in front of him, and he was holding a cup of coffee in both hands, as if trying to warm his fingers. Emily noticed that he seemed even more casual here, outside of the formal setting of the museum. Something about it seemed to harmonize with the surrounding space, as if it were part of the cafe's carefully crafted aesthetic. As she approached, she felt a nervous knot in her stomach. Ryan looked up and smiled when he saw her. He stood up immediately, pulling out the chair for her and saying he was glad she came. Emily thanked him, settling into the chair and adjusting the scarf around her neck. The soft texture of the wool against her skin contrasted with the slight tremor in her hands as she took the menu he held out to her. Ryan commented that the place was one of his favorite inspirations, describing how he used to write lyrics there while watching people come and go, each carrying a unique story. Emily responded by saying that she could see why he liked the environment, that there was something almost magical about the combination of light and sound there. As she spoke, she noticed the details of his face in the soft light of the lamp suspended above them. The fine lines around his eyes, the way he frowned slightly when he was focused. He asked about his ideas for the exhibition, and Emily began to explain, feeling more in control as she delved into her area of expertise. His voice took on an assured tone as he described how he intended to organize the pieces into a visual narrative that reflected the emotional impact of the music. She mentioned that the choice of colors for the lighting and layout of the rooms would be fundamental, suggesting warm tones to convey warmth and intimacy. As she spoke, Ryan rested his chin on one hand, listening intently, as if absorbing every word. He said he was fascinated to hear someone talk so passionately about something, and that this was a rarity in the world he lived in, where many people seemed only interested in keeping up appearances. Emily felt her cheeks heat up at the compliment, but quickly changed the focus of the conversation to avoid him noticing the impact his words had on her. The conversation flowed naturally for a while, until Ryan casually mentioned that her passion for music seemed to be more than just admiration. Emily froze for a moment, her hand stopping in the middle of stirring the coffee she had ordered. There was something in his expression that made her feel as if he could see right through her. He didn't insist, but the comment hung in the air, like a prolonged musical note that echoed inside her. When the meeting ended, Ryan walked her to the cafe door. The cold outside enveloped them both, and the icy texture of the snow began to accumulate on their coats. He said he was looking forward to working with her and was sure that together they would create something unforgettable. Emily responded by saying that she was excited too, but inside, a battle was raging. Part of her wanted to believe his words, while another part braced herself for the challenges of keeping her admiration for him hidden. When I returned home that night, the apartment seemed quieter than usual. Emily took off her coat and left her shoes near the door, walking directly to the drawer that held her fan items. She opened it and looked at Ryan's autographed poster, feeling a mix of embarrassment and comfort. Lightly touching the signature with her fingers, she wondered if she would ever be able to show him who she really was, without destroying the fragile connection that was beginning to form. She closed the drawer carefully, trying to seal not only the object, but also the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to spill over. The distant sound of traffic outside seemed to coincide with the rapid beat of her heart as she prepared to face what came next. The winter sun bathed the main gallery, turning the white walls a soft gold as the light streamed through the tall stained glass windows. Emily was there, analyzing the arrangement of the modern art pieces that were still awaiting their final places in the exhibition. Each painting, each sculpture seemed to have a particular weight at that moment, as if even the works were aware of Ryan Kim's presence. He stood beside her, poring over a detailed model of the gallery, his eyes fixed on the miniature model that reflected the plans for the exhibit. Emily glanced at the way her fingers slid over the small elements of the model, carefully adjusting the position of an imaginary piece. Her nails were short but well cared for, the tips slightly pink. The black jacket he wore contrasted with the gray turtleneck sweater, a soft fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She noticed that he carried with him the discreet scent of cedar and something more woodsy, a scent that seemed to match his introspective personality. Ryan said he believed art and music needed to meet in a space where emotion was palpable. He explained that he wanted people to not only see the works, but to feel like they were inside them, as if they were part of the creative process itself. Emily responded by saying that this was an ambitious concept, but that she believed it was possible. She mentioned that they could use lighting to create an immersive atmosphere, perhaps incorporating subtle soundtracks in some areas of the gallery. He looked at her with genuine interest, asking how she had thought of combining visual and auditory emotions. The question was a challenge that Emily accepted with enthusiasm. delving into a detailed explanation of the importance of colors in creating sensations. Warm tones to evoke nostalgia, cold tones for introspection. As she spoke, her mind was occupied with the words, but her body was aware of the closeness between them. The warmth of his presence beside her felt almost tangible, and she struggled to maintain her focus. Ryan commented that he loved hearing their ideas because there was a depth to them that he rarely found. Emily felt the weight of his words in her chest, like a wave of pride mixed with anxiety. She responded by saying he was being too kind, but he interrupted, saying he admired her passion and was eager to see it all come to fruition. Over the next few days, interactions between them became more frequent. There were behind-the-scenes meetings, visits to areas still under preparation, and spontaneous moments when he asked her opinion on details that were not within the scope of her work. He seemed to look for excuses to extend the conversations, which didn't go unnoticed by Emily. On a particularly cold afternoon, as they left the museum to seek inspiration at a gallery in Soho, Emily noticed the contrast between the two. She wore a long cream coat, which matched her beige scarf and leather gloves, while Ryan, with his carefree style, only had a wool jacket that seemed insufficient for the temperature. She asked if he wasn't feeling cold, and he smiled, saying that he liked feeling the wind on his face because it helped him think. The gallery they visited had a completely different feel to Amama. The space was small and intimate, with exposed brick walls and industrial light bulbs hanging from black wires that created dramatic lighting. The smell of fresh paint hung in the air, mixed with the sweet aroma of coffee coming from a coffee pot in the corner. Ryan walked slowly, observing each piece carefully. Emily followed him, trying to guess his thoughts from his expressions. When they stopped in front of an installation made up of fragments of mirrors that reflected lights in shades of blue and purple, Ryan commented that it seemed to capture a piece of melancholy. He asked if Emily believed it was possible to translate the same feeling into a song. She replied yes, that music and art were made of the same material, emotion. He said he loved that perspective and might use that as a basis for a new composition. There was a moment of silence between them as they looked at the installation. Emily felt as if time had slowed down, leaving them suspended in a space where only the two of them existed. When he finally turned to her, there was something different in his eyes, an intensity that made her look away quickly, pretending to be focused on something else. On the way back to the museum, the taxi they shared was warm, but the cold outside seemed to have followed Emily inside. She looked out the window, watching the city lights blurred by the frost on the glass, while Ryan fiddled with his notebook, scribbling what looked like a sketch of handwriting. He asked her what she was thinking, and Emily responded by saying that she was wondering how the exhibition could turn into something truly memorable. He smiled, saying he believed it would be memorable because she was involved. Emily didn't know how to respond. There was an unexpected sweetness to his words, and she felt a mixture of satisfaction and fear. Something was changing between them, and she knew that the closer they grew, the riskier it would be to protect the secret she carried. When they arrived at the museum, Emily went straight to her office. As she closed the door, she leaned back against it, feeling the cool wood against her back. The memory of Ryan's look, of his words, continued to echo in her mind. Night was slowly falling over New York, staining the horizon with shades of orange and purple that merged into a deep blue. The lights of the Metropolitan Modern Arts Museum were beginning to shine like little stars amid the growing darkness, illuminating the visitors still milling around the main entrance. Emily stood in the gallery's side hallway, adjusting the position of a spotlight as she felt the weight of responsibility rest on her shoulders. The air was faintly scented with the scent of polished wood, and the distant sound of footsteps echoed in the empty space around him. She knew Ryan was somewhere in the museum, reviewing the final details of the exhibit with the same meticulous attention as she did. It was as if he managed to capture the essence of the project with one look, making everything more intriguing and at the same time more challenging. Emily tried to concentrate, but her mind seemed constantly invaded by fragments of their conversations, by the smiles he offered effortlessly, and by the moments when he surprised her with questions that went beyond work. When she finally finished the adjustment, she put away her tools and walked down the hall. The white walls of the museum glowed under the soft lights, but at that moment, they felt oppressive, as if amplifying the whirlwind of emotions she had been trying to suppress. She felt like she was getting close to a breaking point, as if the delicate facade she had built was about to crumble. Ryan found her in the central gallery, where a large installation was being set up. It was an imposing piece, a tangle of gold and silver threads that rose from the floor like branches of an ethereal tree, catching the light from small, hidden projectors. He commented that the work seemed to symbolize invisible connections, those that link people in ways that we often don't even notice. Emily responded by saying that she found it fascinating how art could convey something so complex without using words. And he added that this was why art and music were so close. They both spoke what lips could not. There was a moment of silence, and Emily realized he was watching her more closely than usual. She asked if something was wrong, trying to mask the discomfort she felt under his penetrating gaze. He said no, he was just thinking about how there seemed to be something more about her, something she was keeping hidden. He laughed softly and said that maybe he was just trying to read too much into things. But Emily felt like he'd hit a nerve, like he was starting to unravel the threads of her secret. She quickly diverted the topic, mentioning that they needed to review the exhibition's assembly schedule. He agreed, but there was something in his expression that made her believe he wasn't convinced. As they discussed the details, Emily noticed that her hands were shaking slightly when holding the tablet. The tension in his chest seemed to grow by the minute, as if the air around him was becoming heavier. Later, while Emily was organizing some pieces in the museum's storage room, she found an old box of documents that she had forgotten about. Inside were old exhibition catalogs, and underneath it all, a Ryan Kim vinyl she had bought years ago. The cover was slightly faded, but it still showed his portrait clearly, his serious eyes looking straight into the camera as if they could see through it. She held the vinyl for a few seconds, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and regret, before placing it back in the box and closing it carefully. As she put away the box, Michael Bennett appeared at the warehouse entrance, his tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow in the yellow light. He asked if everything was under control and mentioned that it seemed like she was spending more time with Ryan than expected. Emily responded by saying that Ryan's involvement in the project was essential and that he was contributing in a meaningful way. Michael gave a dry smile and commented that he hoped she wasn't getting more involved than necessary, as it would be problematic for the museum if something like that happened. His words echoed in Emily's mind as she walked back to her office. She knew Michael was partly right. There was a line she couldn't cross, both professionally and personally. But at the same time, I felt like I was already dangerously close to that line, like a trapeze artist balancing on an increasingly unstable wire. That night, Ryan unexpectedly showed up at her office. He said he wanted to show something and held out the notebook he was carrying. Inside was a sketch of a song he was composing, inspired by the installation they had discussed earlier. He explained that the melody was still unfinished, but that he thought it captured the spirit of the project. Emily read the words carefully, feeling a tightness in her chest as she realized the depth of the lyrics, as if he were trying to express something he couldn't say directly. She said she thought it was beautiful and that he had a unique talent for transforming emotions into art. He thanked her, saying he was trying to learn from her as he thought her passion for art inspired him in ways he hadn't expected. Emily tried to ignore the heat that rose to her face, but she knew something was changing between them. When Ryan left, the office fell silent. Emily sat in her chair, gripping the tablet tightly as she tried to process everything that was happening. She knew that the secret she carried couldn't stay hidden much longer, and that when it came to light, it could change everything. The snow was falling slowly that morning, covering New York with a blanket of white that muffled the sounds of the city. The museum, always busy preparing for the exhibition, seemed extraordinarily calm, as if the world outside was on pause. Emily was in the main lobby, adjusting the details of one of the information signs that would be displayed next to a painting. His fingers touched the smooth surface of the acrylic, feeling the coolness of the material against his skin. The discreet smell of cleanliness mixed with the woody aroma of the nearby frames. She turned when she heard firm footsteps echoing on the marble. Ryan was there, dressed in a black wool coat that contrasted with the whiteness of the room. He carried a paper bag in his hands, and said he had brought coffee, stating that she seemed to need something hot to face the freezing day. Emily accepted it with a hesitant smile, feeling the heat of the paper cup warming her hands. The rich, earthy aroma of coffee rose, filling the space between them. While having coffee together in the corner of one of the galleries, Ryan started talking about his music. He described how each composition was an attempt to capture ephemeral moments, such as the light passing through the museum's windows and creating dancing shadows on the walls. He said visual art did something similar, freezing emotions in colors and shapes. Emily responded by saying that she admired this perspective, that she had always thought of curation as a bridge between the artist's intentions and the public's interpretation. He looked at her for a moment too long, his brown eyes carrying something that seemed more than simple curiosity. He asked why she seemed so connected to the idea of translating emotions. Emily froze inside, feeling the tension build in her chest. She responded evasively, saying it was part of her job. Ryan tilted his head slightly, as if he was trying to decipher something invisible, but he didn't insist. Later that day, they worked together to arrange the pieces in a smaller gallery, dedicated to more intimate works. The walls were painted a soft shade of gray, and the light wooden floor creaked slightly under his steps. Emily wore thin gloves to handle the pieces, feeling the delicate texture of a ceramic sculpture. Ryan helped her, his careful movements revealing a quiet respect for the works. In a moment of pause, while they both observed the arrangement of the pieces, Ryan broke the silence by asking what she thought of music as part of everyday life. He said many people saw music as something distant, but he believed it was everywhere, even in the small sounds of footsteps or the wind against a window. Emily responded by saying that she agreed, that she herself used to look for music to fill the empty spaces in her day. He smiled, saying he could imagine that she seemed like someone who understood the importance of the subtle layers of life. There was a soft knock on the gallery door, and Julie Wong, Ryan's agent, appeared. She looked impeccable as always, wearing a dark gray blazer that accentuated her firm stance. She said she needed to discuss Ryan's schedule and mentioned, with a sharp look at Emily, that she hoped everything was going as planned. Emily felt a slight discomfort under that look, but responded by saying that they were on schedule and that Ryan's involvement had been essential to the success of the project. After Julie left, Ryan commented that she was efficient, but sometimes forgot that he was more than an agenda. He smiled resignedly, and Emily realized once again the invisible pressures he carried. She said she admired how he managed to balance everything, and he responded by saying he was still learning how to do that. As the day wound down, Ryan suggested she accompany him to a nearby cafe to discuss ideas for an interactive space in the exhibit. Emily hesitated, feeling that spending more time with him outside the museum might complicate things, but she eventually agreed. The cafe was cozy, with dark wood furniture and lamps that created a golden glow in the room. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was comforting, and the voices of the few customers formed a low murmur in the background. They chose a table near a bookshelf that seemed to be there more for decoration than for use. Ryan ordered a cappuccino, while Emily opted for chamomile tea. They discussed ideas for the exhibition, but the conversation soon turned to more personal matters. He asked how she had started her career in the art world, and Emily told him about her passion for color and shape since childhood. Although she kept the more intimate details to herself, Ryan talked about how music saved him in moments of doubt, how each song was a way to find meaning in a chaotic world. Emily said she found it inspiring, and he responded by saying that she also seemed to find meaning in what she did, but that there was something about her that he couldn't fully understand, as if an important part was hidden. Emily felt the weight of his words and looked away, pretending to be interested in a picture on the wall. She knew he was getting closer to discovering his secret, and that terrified her. When they said goodbye, she returned home feeling exhausted, as if every interaction with Ryan drained her emotional energy. Sitting on her couch, with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, she looked at the drawer where she kept her fan items. The temptation to open and revisit that side of herself was strong, but she resisted. The secret she kept seemed heavier every day, and she knew she couldn't hide it forever. The main gallery was completely lit, with smooth beams of light reflecting on the surfaces of carefully positioned works of art. The atmosphere had a slight aroma of fresh paint mixed with the subtle smell of the waxed wood. The inauguration day was approaching, and Emily supervised every detail with a critical look, adjusting angles, reviewing notes on her tablet, and checking the last-minute programming. She felt a growing weight on her shoulders, but also a palpable excitement for the imminent success of the exhibition. Ryan appeared in the middle of the gallery, his firm step echoing against the marble floor. He was wearing a navy shirt with his sleeves folded to his elbows, revealing strong wrists and a discreet leather watch. He carried a notebook and a quiet smile that made the air look a little less tense. He asked if everything was ready and if she needed help with something, and Emily replied that she was almost everything under control, but thanked her offer. As they walked side by side, Ryan commented that he was impressed by the way everything was taking shape, saying that the exhibition seemed an extension of what they had discussed together, but with her unique signature in every detail. Emily felt the warmth of her words, but looked away, focusing on the sculpture in front of her. She replied that this had only been possible because of the inspiration he had brought. But inside he felt a twinge of nervousness to realize how much his lives were intertwined in that project. While discussing the positioning of an interactive installation, Ryan received an urgent connection from Julie Wong and had to rush out, leaving her notebook on the nearby table. Emily looked at the notebook for a few seconds, fighting curiosity. She knew she should leave him there and continue with her work, but something inside her drove her to catch him. The cover leather was hot to the touch, as if still carried the heat from Ryan's hands. Upon opening, he found pages and pages of letters, some scribbled tightly, some gently written, almost as whispers on paper. There were excerpts of thoughts that looked like fragments of his soul, but what most caught his attention was a sketch of a song that mentioned the idea of a guarded secret, something that separated two people who seemed intended to meet. The words resonated in Emily as a mirror of her own fears. She closed the notebook in a hurry, as if the weight of what she had read was too much to carry. Later, that same day, Ryan returned to the gallery. He found Emily still working, adjusting the height of a panel. He asked if she had seen her notebook, and she hesitated for a moment before pointing to where she had left him. He smiled and thanked him, but realized something in his expression, as if she was hiding something. That night, after the museum's closure, Emily was to finish some adjustments on her own. The silence around him was almost absolute, broken only by the distant sound of cars passing by an avenue outside. She walked to the warehouse to seek last-minute support, and upon returning to the office, she used to store her personal belongings. The door was slightly open, something she didn't remember to have left. Upon entering, he found Ryan standing next to the drawer she kept locked. He held an item that seemed completely displaced in that environment, the autographed poster she had kept hidden for so many years. He asked in a low and contained voice if that was hers. Emily felt the world around her collapse. The heat went up to his face, a mixture of shame and panic. She tried to explain, but the words were disconnected. He said he was not there to judge, but he needed to understand what it meant. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the air look dense and heavy, and began to explain. She told how she had become a fan of her music years ago, how her compositions had been a refuge for her during difficult times, and how, even after taking her position in the museum, she could not abandon that side of herself. Ryan was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying every nuance of her expression. He said he didn't expect anything like that, but he was surprised in a way I couldn't describe. He asked why she felt she needed to hide it, and Emily replied that she feared her admiration could be misunderstood, that she could compromise her professional position and also the work they were building together. He said he understood his hesitation, but admired her honesty. He added that this explained many things about it, such as the intensity with which he dedicated himself to work, and the care he demonstrated in every detail. He said he saw it as proof of his passion, something that made everything she did even more authentic. Emily didn't know how to answer. There was a lightness in Ryan's words that contrasted with the weight she was carrying, but still felt deep anxiety, as if waiting for the next question. for the next look that could expose her even more. Ryan put the poster back in the drawer and said she didn't have to worry, that her secret was safe with him. He smiled in a tranquilizing way and left the office, leaving Emily alone again. She sat in the chair, the heart still beating rapidly. Relief for his unexpected reaction mixed with the fear of how it could change the dynamics between them. She knew things would never be the same, and as she looked out the window to the city's lights, wondered if she had taken the first step to something bigger, or if she was about to lose everything. The museum seemed quieter than ever that morning, as if the walls were absorbing the whirlwind of emotions that dominated Emily since the night before. The sky outside was gray, with heavy clouds threatening snow, and the air had that cold, clean smell that always preceded a storm. Emily was sitting on her table, the tablet in hand, but the screen remained out of mind as her thoughts revolved around what had happened. Ryan knew. The open drawer, the autographed poster, its quiet but meaningful words, everything seemed to echo in your mind as a movie that couldn't stop watching. There was something disturbing and at the same time strangely liberating in the fact that his secret had been discovered. The relief of no longer having to carry the weight alone mingled with the fear that his career and the delicate balance of his relationship with Ryan could be irrevocably altered. She was interrupted by a light knock on the door. It was Sophia, carrying 2 cups of coffee and bringing with him the sweet vanilla perfume that always seemed to accompany her. Sophia put the coffee on Emily's table and asked if she was okay, commenting she looked even more distracted than usual. Emily hesitated, but decided not to tell what had happened. Instead, he said he was just tired of approaching the inauguration. Sophia replied by saying that this was understandable, but Emily needed to remember to take care of herself. Later, when Ryan entered the gallery for a last review, Emily felt her heart accelerate. He seemed different that day, more relaxed, as if the tension he used to accompany his movements had dissipated. He greeted her with a light smile and asked if they could talk. She nodded, although she felt the air around her more dense with the anticipation. They walked together to the main installation room, where the light was softened by filters that created a welcoming atmosphere. The subtle smell of polished wood and fresh paint filled the space. Ryan stopped alongside a sculpture of abstract ways and said he wanted to thank him for being honest with him. He explained that he had spent much of his life dealing with external expectations and pressures, but never imagined that he could be a source of inspiration to someone like her. Emily felt a warm wave invading her face and replied by saying she didn't know if her admiration could be called inspiration, which was something deeper, something she couldn't always explain to herself. Ryan laughed softly and said he thought that was what made everything so authentic, that sometimes the most important things did not need an explanation. As they spoke, Emily realized that the dynamics between them was changing. There was a frankness in Ryan's words, a willingness to open that she had not noticed before. He talked about how his music had been a way of dealing with his own vulnerability, how each composition was an attempt to understand the world and its place in it. Emily felt an unexpected connection, as if the barrier she had built between them was starting to crumble. In the following days, the proximity between them intensified. Ryan seemed to look for more excuses to be next to Emily, asking her opinion about details that she knew he was perfectly able to decide on his own. He was alert in a way that made her disconcerted, as if he really wanted to know her, besides the professional facade she had kept for so long. There was a particularly striking moment during the assembly of one of the last pieces. Ryan called her to help him adjust the lighting in a mirrorship installation that reflected colored lights and hypnotist patterns on the walls. As they adjusted the lights together, their arms touched briefly, and Emily felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold of the room. He asked, almost in a whisper, if she believed that people could meet by chance, or if everything was part of a larger plan. Emily replied by saying that she liked to think that some connections were inevitable, that some people were designed to cross the paths of each other. Ryan smiled, and she noticed something in her eyes, an intensity that seemed to carry more questions than answers. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the gallery door opening, and Julie Wong came in with her usually rigid posture. She said she needed Ryan's attention to a press meeting, but gave Emily a sharp look before leaving, as if trying to measure what was happening between them. Later, that same day, while Emily reviewed the final details alone in her office, she received a message from Ryan. He said he wanted to find her after office hours in a coffee he knew she liked. The invitation made your heart jump, but also brought a new weight of uncertainty. When he arrived at coffee, the place was more empty than normal, with just a few busy tables. The warm light of the lamps created an intimate atmosphere, and the smell of newly broken coffee and sweet bread baked in the air. Ryan was already there, sitting near the window where the city's lights blinked like a surreal backdrop. He got up when she arrived and asked if she wanted something to drink, but Emily said she was fine. Ryan began to speak, his low and sincere voice. He said he wanted her to know that although he was surprised by what he had discovered, it didn't change the way he saw her. He said he admired her dedication, the passion for what he did, and that he believed that what they shared was rare and valuable. Emily felt her tears accumulate in her eyes, but flashed quickly, refusing to let them fall. She said she was afraid that everything she had built could crumble, that her admiration could be misunderstood and end up destroying the most important thing to her. Ryan replied by saying that he understood her fear, but sometimes it was necessary to risk to find something that was worth it. He held her hand on the table, his firm but comforting touch. Emily felt that at that moment, something had changed irrevocably. There was a silent acceptance, an unable promise that hovered between them. As she looked at his eyes, she knew she was entering an unknown territory, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she wasn't alone. The inauguration of the exhibition finally arrived, bringing with it a vibrant energy that seemed to be pulsed on the walls of the museum. Outside, the lights of the reflectors illuminated the imposing facade, while prominent guests, artists, critics, and journalists climbed the stairs covered by a discreet red carpet. Emily watched the movement through the large window of her office, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that took over her chest. She felt the thin texture of the black dress she had chosen for the night, the fabric surrounding her like a fragile armor. The museum was impregnated with the aroma of fresh flowers scattered in carefully positioned arrangements, mixed with the slight smell of polished wood and expensive perfumes that the guests brought with them. The soft lights bathed the galleries in gold and silver, creating an environment that seemed suspended in time. Ryan was in the main gallery, greeting guests with a quiet smile that hid the tiredness of recent weeks. He wore a dark blue suit impeccably adjusted, but with a slightly loose tie that gave a touch of informality to his look. He seemed comfortable in the role of host, but his eyes looked for something or someone between the crowd. When she finally spotted Emily, her smile became more genuine. She walked to him, feeling the eyes of some people to follow her movements. Ryan said she was stunning, and Emily replied by saying that he seemed to have been born for that night. There was something in his voice, a slight hesitation that denounced the weight of what still hanged between them. Before they could continue, Michael Bennett approached, squeezing Ryan's hand with a calculated enthusiasm and congratulating both for the success of the exhibition. While Michael spoke, Emily noticed the tension on Ryan's shoulders, almost imperceptible but present. He answered politely, but there was something in his expression that showed that his patience was being tested. When Michael finally walked away, Ryan turned to Emily and said she needed a moment away from the crowd. He asked if she could accompany him, and she agreed without hesitation. They walked in silence to one of the smaller galleries, where the light was softer and the space was empty. The walls were adorned with smaller paintings, their golden frames capturing the brightness of the lights above. Ryan stopped in the center of the room, taking a deep breath as if trying to reorganize his thoughts. He looked at Emily and asked if she was really happy with all that. She felt like it was worth it. Emily replied by saying that the exhibition was all she had dreamed, but deep down she still felt a restlessness, as if something important was missing. Ryan smiled slightly and said he knew exactly how she felt. He explained that, despite being surrounded by people, he sometimes still felt isolated, stuck between the expectations of others and his own desires. He took a step toward her, his more intense gaze now. He said he believed there was something special between them, something he couldn't ignore, but he didn't want to force her to face before he was ready. Emily felt her heart accelerate. his words echoing like a family melody. She replied by saying that she also felt this connection, but was still afraid to risk, to put everything they built in danger. Ryan said he understood, but sometimes the risk was necessary to find something true. He held her hand, her firm but kind fingers, and said she was willing to wait as long as she needed. Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and emotion. She knew he was right, that the fear she felt was the only obstacle between her and something that could change her life. The conversation was interrupted by an assistant who has been in a hurry, warning that Ryan needed to return to the main gallery to serve the press. He nodded, but before leaving, he looked at Emily once again, as if trying to record that moment in his memory. Later, when the event was coming to an end and the guests began to disperse, Emily found a note left at her table. It was Ryan's with just one sentence: "Sometimes the most valuable art is the one we dare to create together." She held the ticket for a moment, feeling the texture of the paper between her fingers, while the words seemed to echo inside her. When she finally left the museum, the night was cold but refreshing. The snow had begun to fall again, covering the streets with a soft shine under the city's lights. As he walked, Emily felt a lightness she hadn't felt long ago. She knew the way ahead would be full of challenges, but she was also beginning to believe she was able to face them and perhaps find something extraordinary in the process. The snow had stopped falling, but the crystalline shine of his passage remained in the streets of New York, reflecting the city's lights like small stars fragments. It was a cold but clear morning, and the museum was quiet, breathing the silence that was always following great events. Emily was in the main gallery alone, walking slowly between the works that had been the center of attention the night before. The space now seemed different. The pieces that once seemed to dialogue with each other amid the energy of the guests were now dipped in a contemplative calm. The subtle smell of waxed wood and withered flowers still hovered in the air, but was accompanied by something more personal: the feeling that everything had changed. Emily ran her fingers through a golden frame, the rough texture under her skin reminding her of the choices that brought her there. She remembered Ryan's gaze the night before, the firmness of her words and the softness of her touch. The connection he had mentioned, something she had been feeling but never named it, now seemed as real as the art she cured. It was as if, for the first time, she could see the meaning of her journey, the invisible thread that connected her love for art and music to something greater, the courage to allow himself to be seen. The gallery door opened, and the sound echoed softly in the empty space. Ryan entered, wearing a dark wool coat that contrasted with the shine of the white walls. He carried 2 cups of coffee in hand, the steam rising gently in the morning light. He smiled as he saw her and said he thought she might need some coffee to start the day. Emily accepted the glass, feeling the immediate heat against her cold hands. The rich aroma of coffee enveloped her, bringing a strange sense of comfort and nostalgia. Ryan asked how she was, and she answered saying she felt exhausted but accomplished. He laughed softly and said that was a good way to describe what he also felt. They walked together for the gallery, the steps echoing gently as they talked about the small details of the previous night, the reactions of the guests, the compliments of criticism, the moments when everything seemed to have come out of control, but somehow adjusted in the end. Ryan said he had never felt so connected to something other than his music, and that it was her merit. Emily stopped at the installation of mirrors, the piece that had symbolized so many things during the assembly process. The lights were still scheduled to reflect colorful patterns by the walls, and the effect seemed almost magical in the morning light. Ryan approached, standing by her, and asked what she saw when she looked at the installation. She replied that she saw a story being told, but that the story never ended, which changed depending on who looked at her. He said he thought that beautiful. That was exactly what he felt in writing the song, as if work was never really his own, but from those who experienced it. There was a moment of silence between them, filled only by the distant sound of the wind against the museum's windows. Ryan put his coffee aside and held Emily's hand, her fingers intertwined with hers firmly but kindly. He said he knew she still had doubts, that the fear of exposing her vulnerabilities was something he understood well, but he believed there was something much stronger than the fear among them. Emily felt her heart accelerate, his words penetrating deeply. She knew he was right. He had spent so much time hiding parts of himself, convinced that he could not be completely accepted, that he had forgotten what it was like to trust. She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and uncertainty, and said she wanted to try. She didn't know what the future reserved, but was willing to find out beside him. Rayan smiled, a smile that seemed to carry not only joy, but also relief. He said that was all he wanted to hear. He pulled her softly to the closer, and Emily felt his warmth contrast with the cold that still hanged in the air. The moment was simple, but loaded with meanings, as if they were both opening the doors to something new and unexpected. Later, while the museum was beginning to come to life with the first visitors of the day, Emily was in her office, organizing the latest notes of the exhibition. She found Ryan's ticket, the same as he had left the night before, and read the words again. Sometimes the most valuable art is the one we dare to create together. She held the ticket for a moment, allowing himself to feel each layer of meaning he carried. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to hide anything. The secret that before defined her now seemed just a part of who she was, a piece in a larger mosaic that was still being assembled. As she prepared to leave, she heard Ryan's voice in the hallway. He was talking to one of the assistants, but there was something in his tone, a lightness that made Emily smile without realizing it. She knew this was just the beginning, that the way ahead would be full of challenges and discoveries, but she also knew she was ready. When she left the museum, the cold air of the afternoon wrapped her, but this time she didn't seem so sharp. She walked the snow-covered streets, with the city around her around a rhythm that seemed strangely aligned with hers. In the distance, she saw Ryan waiting for her at the entrance of a coffee, her silhouette standing out against the bright background. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past slowly disappearing as she took her first steps toward the future. There was something extraordinary at that moment, a feeling she knew she would carry forever, like a melody that would never stop echoing.